The family of swordsmen that ruled over more than half of the world was called Runkandel, a family that was born with strong bodies and excellent talent. This allowed them to rule the world with their overwhelming power. Every battle they took part in ended with their victory. In any conditions, this family stood at the top, above their enemies. Thanks to this, they had absolutely everything. They enjoyed life and did it with joy. All this briefly described the lands where power rules, in which the strong devour the weak. And this is the family into which he, Jin Runkandel, the youngest son of the Runkandel family, was born. Jin was the child who chose the family sword in a selection ritual that could predict his future. He was the child who would receive his family's destiny. The guy always believed that only success and fame awaited him in the future. However, everything was not nearly as sweet as he could have imagined. As it turned out later, he had no talent for wielding a sword, and his family's blood was enough for minimal skills in handling a sword. Shame, dishonor, someone who is worse than the average representative of the Runkandel family, all this was about Jin. One day, the boy's brothers came to his training and immediately noticed that he was aimlessly waving a wooden sword. They kept laughing at him the whole time and saying that the balisade, the sword he had chosen as a child, was not something he should play with. Jin couldn't answer them and fight back, because deep down he understood that they were actually right, and he had not lived up to the hopes that were placed on him. But the older brothers clearly didn't like that Jin continued to ignore them, so they asked him to answer the question again. Well, for motivation, one of them decided to hit the guy so that it would be easier for him to think, and he would find the answer to their question faster. They kept calling him useless, and that everything he did was useless. Jin decided to reach for his sword to fight them back, but this attempt was also successfully stopped. The older brother continued to assure the guy that he would never succeed, and that it would be better for him to stop right now, so as not to disgrace their glorious family anymore. They started going through his pockets and found a small notebook that contained basic sword fighting theory. And this caused even more laughter for these guys. They found it funny to realize the fact that the guy thinks that he can achieve something just by studying theory. No matter how much Jin asked them to stop and give him back his things, they didn't listen to him and continued to break his things, saying that he shouldn't have been given a chance. It seemed to them that because he was once given a chance, the guy now doesn't know his place, and worst of all, that he has hope. Jin tried to tell them that there was no point in breaking his things to get that across to him. But these words only further angered his brothers, who took him on. They told him this for his own good, and he simply has no right to contradict them. And given that he continued his disobedience, they decided that they needed to teach him some manners. Their bullying and his absolutely worthless talent, he felt it every day. But this did not stop him at all, and he believed that if he continued to work and try, then one day the family would recognize him, and he would finally be able to become a full-fledged member of Runkandel. Jin really believed this until his family decided to expel the guy from the family. When he was 25, he was expelled from his family and became a miserable nobody who wandered aimlessly. It was hard in that period of his life, but there was still one positive moment. He met a master, and then Jin found out that he had talent too. But more importantly, it was a talent that was forbidden in his family, the art of magic. Exactly 3 years have passed since then, and Jin was not going to stop developing his abilities as a magician. Moreover, he planned to combine the magical power that exists in nature and the magical power of a wizard. It seemed to him that in this way he would be able to strengthen his power. But at some point these experiments went too far and the guy ended up in a place unknown to him. Jin spent some time in this place, and at some point heard an otherworldly voice, which he introduced as Soldred, and according to this creature, he is the master of all shadows. Soldred, as it turned out, it was not for nothing that Jin was called here. As the god of shadows, he intended to offer him a contract. According to this creature, if Jin makes a contract with him, he will be able to use shadow technique, which means that he will be able to destroy any curse. Soldred noticed that it seemed like the guy had been accumulating hatred from other people since childhood. The Shadow King immediately realized that he was unable to show his talent because of this primitive curse. Jin didn't understand what Soldred was trying to tell him, so the Shadow Lord explained to him that this curse was called the Blade Illusion, which suppressed his sword skills. Especially this curse was terrible for the guy because he was from the Runkandel family. Soldred decided that this was why he was so drawn to the guy and why they were talking now. He decided that from that moment on there would be no more curse that brought him pain, and after these words he broke the magic chain that was around the guy. But the Lord of Shadows decided not to stop there and decided that now he needed to make Jin an unprecedented magician. According to Soldred, he will be very pleased to watch him. A few seconds later, Jin found himself back in his room and just stood there for a while, recovering from the shock, because he sincerely did not understand what had just happened to him. But this did not last long, and as soon as he came to his senses, the first thing he decided to do was take his sword in his hands and try to remove the curse. Jin ran out into the street, removed the protective cover from his sword, and was able to deliver a crushing blow. Everything was as Soldred said. The guy finally began to feel the strength in his hands. As soon as he raised the thing again, he began to feel new things with each new second. It literally made the guy crazy in this regard. It seemed to him that this sword had no weight at all. Jin felt like he was just waving his hand. The weakest boy of the Runkandle family will finally be able to show what he is capable of. After the curse was lifted, he finally saw the fruits of his hard work. Moreover, he understood that he could add magic to it, and then his title of the weakest would miraculously disappear. But after some time, after another battle, he lay on the ground and heard only screams. Jin felt that his body was very heavy, and apparently his life was coming to its logical end. He tried to call his master and Soldred, but unfortunately no one answered him. Jin understood that, unfortunately, there was no one here. He couldn't even imagine that he would die as a nobody. It seemed to the guy that this was all because nothing was supposed to work out for him. The magic and power of Soldred that he finally received, he didn't even have a chance to use it. But most of all, he didn't understand why he was given a chance at all, if everything was supposed to happen this way. After which he lost consciousness, but not for long. Jin woke up again and saw his childish hands in front of him. And when he raised his head, members of his family stood before him. And around him there was a huge number of swords. Jin did not understand what was happening here at all, because he was sure that he was dead. But his thoughts were interrupted by Jilly, who asked the guy not to lose heart, because he was the young Master Jin. The guy simply didn't understand what was happening until he saw that very sword. Barisada, the sword he chose as a child but was never granted the honor of using. Now, little Jin realized that he was about to undergo a selection ritual. In other words, he went back in time, returned to the body of 1-year-old Jean Runkandle. As a child, he accidentally picked up this sword, which led to great surprise on the part of his family. But in this life, Jin chose it consciously, even though he understood what it meant for him. The family members did not understand how this could even happen. After all, according to the rules, this was the head of the family's sword, and if the laws were followed, then now the head of the family is young Master Jin. At this point, the selection ceremony ended, and gradually everyone dispersed, although they could not stop thinking about it. But this story did not end so easily, and one of the heads of the family ordered to send the youngest of them to the Thunder Castle, and 6 years have passed since then. During this time, Jin learned to read and managed to read quite a few books from the first row, so he decided to move to the second, although his small height did not allow him to do this yet. According to the family's rules, he has to stay here until he turns 10, so there are only 3 years left. But all this time lasts too long, because the guy was so bored and lonely in this castle. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by the screams of his maid, who was afraid of something. The girl stood in place and tried to recover from the shock of what she had just seen. There was a rather large bird lying on the floor, although it most likely won't fly anywhere again. Jin was absolutely calm, because he understood that the only ones capable of such an outrage in Thunder Castle were his old acquaintances. And his thoughts were confirmed. These were his 2 older brothers, who in this life also behaved disgustingly and humiliate Jin. One of them was named Daytona. He was the 11th of the 13 Runkandle brothers, and he was most sorry that the bird was found first by the maid and not by their little brother. His friend Hayton, who was the 12th brother, confirmed that they would personally bring it so that he could look at it. Looking at their brother, they hoped that he liked their gift. They so wanted him to shed a tear. Jin did not forget that when these brothers became commanders in their past life, they became famous for destroying everyone. And in this life, as you can see, nothing has changed. Now they are at most 9 years old, and just for the sake of tormenting Jin a little, they destroyed this bird. While Jin was thinking about this, they continued to ask him not to cry, because it irritates them a lot. But the guy continued to ignore them, and this began to irritate them. They decided to remind him that he had chosen the Barisada, and essentially chosen the fate of the head of the family. And now it seemed to them that he was behaving so badly. Jin tried to answer but didn't have time, because Hayton decided to teach him a lesson for his brother speaking so quietly. But his blow was successfully blocked by Jin, who was clearly tired of enduring all this bullying. Hayton clearly didn't expect this turn of events. Fear of his little brother was clearly visible in his eyes. And it was not in vain, because Jin looked quite frightening. Besides, Jin considered his brother too noisy, and therefore politely asked him to shut his mouth for now. Hayton didn't intend to do this and wanted to say something, but he didn't have time because Gina couldn't stand it and hit him right on the head. This made Jin's older brother even more angry, so he started shouting. Jin couldn't stand it and hit him again so that he finally closed up. After which he added to them that up until this point he had tolerated them, but they had irritated him too much, and therefore he was tired of doing this. And from that moment on, he warned them that the less he saw them, the better for them. Suddenly, one of the elders entered the room, saw this picture, and immediately wanted to ask Jin what happened here. The man saw Hayton and Dayton lying unconscious on the floor and began to visibly panic about it. Jin decided to tell everything as it happened, and said that these two suddenly had a fight, and knocked each other out, and he just happened to be near this incident. This man did not doubt Jin's words for a second, because he actually knew very well that the children of the Runkandle family were distinguished by their cruelty, even towards each other. Khan, that was the name of this man, and he decided that he needed to take the Jin brothers to the doctor, but little Jin thought differently, and immediately told the man that they should be taken to another place where they needed to be. They went outside, where at that time it was raining heavily, and it was even difficult to move. The genie asked to put his two brothers near the tree and dug a small grave next to them. Kan was quite surprised that the little boy decided to leave his brothers here. Moreover, their condition is not so stable, and the storm will only intensify over time. Jin turned to him and said that he was doing all this only so that the brothers would finally learn to be responsible for their actions. Kan was only acting as a servant, so he couldn't argue with the young master. Although no one forbade him to think that when he looks at Jin, he sees a strange energy around him, which clearly does not look like an aura. It began to creep into his mind that it might be magic. And if this is so, then he is sure that this was clearly not just a fight between brothers. Kan decided that the head of the family should know about this situation, so he immediately ordered one of the servants to bring him a horse. Jin carefully watched what was happening below and of course saw that Khan asked to bring him a horse. The guy understood that the man was clearly going to report this to his father. Khan was their guardian knight, but for a common knight, Jin thought he was too attentive. Jin assumed that Khan would first inform the head of the family that he thought the young master had used magic. All this energy around the guy is proof that their contract with Soldred is still in force. Moreover, he had the bonus of their connection with him. He had immunity to curses, and in this life, Jin managed to get rid of the illusion of the blade. The loser Jean Runkandel no longer exists, and from that day on, Jean decided that his life would be radically different from the past. Now the only thing left for Jin to do was meet his father, who at that very moment was listening to what Khan was telling him, and was slightly surprised that the younger one could do such a thing to his brothers. Therefore, hearing such things, he ordered Khan to gather all the commanders. After a few hours, all the commanders began to gather around the chief, and after some time, the chief was informed that 7 Runkandle commanders and 200 knights had been gathered. The head of the family was grateful to them for getting ready so quickly, and now they all went together to the formidable castle. Mary Runkandle, who held the position of the 7th captain, decided to ask her interlocutor why they had all been gathered here so urgently. Deepus, who was the 4th captain, said that he also did not fully understand. It seemed to him that it was somehow connected with the magicians, but he quickly threw this thought away, because he remembered that they were going to attack them next year. Therefore, he discarded all such thoughts and assumed that they were going there only to see the younger one. Mary didn't understand this at all. Why would they go so far just to see the youngest? Although on the other hand, she remembered that it was he who chose the ceremonial sword, and apparently no one was against him becoming the next head of the family. Although looking at their father, they understood that they could not even guess what the man intended to do. Luna, who held the position of 1st captain, turned to Mary and Deepus and asked them to be quiet, because they were talking too loudly about this. From this, Mary concluded that it really was important, since her father was eager to see everything in person, and apparently they have high hopes for the younger one, since they all decided to go to him together. The maid Gina was so glad that the Lord would soon come in person. It seemed to her that he wanted to meet the young master because he missed him very much, So without thinking twice, she decided to dress up the young Gina. At that moment, the guy was thinking that Khan had most likely reported everything in detail. Although he knew that Khan was a very straightforward person, it still seemed to the guy that he would hardly have directly told the head that he had used magic, and most likely he reported everything exactly as he saw it. Jin assumed that he did it in the following way. The youngest of the Runkandel used an unknown power that did not resemble either magic or aura, and therefore his father would personally come to see what it was. The guy clearly realized that he would want to find out in detail what kind of power Jin used against his brothers. And most importantly, the father will decide whether this power will be useful for the prosperity of the family or not. My lord and all his commanders arrived at the formidable castle, and the first thing he did was order the brothers Heighton and Dayton to be called to him. First, he told them that he heard that they had a fight with Jin and wanted to know whose fault it was. Daytona immediately assured his father that they had not actually done anything wrong, and Daytona completely agreed with him, saying that Jin had hit them first. Moreover, they told their father that the younger one did this using a force about which nothing was known. It seemed to them that it was clearly not an aura, and one of the brothers, at one point in the story, nevertheless decided to suggest that it was more like magic. They both understood perfectly well what would happen to the younger one if it really was magic, because it was forbidden in their family. Hayton and Daytona continued to claim that it was magic, and they furthermore believed that Jin needed to be interrogated before he covered his tracks. But their father stopped them in time and told the boys to keep it all a secret, after which he looked at them and added that one cannot survive here with truth alone. He then sent Hayton and Dayton to rest and asked to call Jin, who was already ready to go into his father's room. At that moment, the thought was in his head that his father was Shiran Runkandel, and he was stronger and more cold-blooded than everyone he knew. The most powerful being of this era, who reached the level of a demigod, and in other words, he was called the Knight of Genesis. He used to be an ordinary human, but the price he had to pay for gaining godlike power was human emotions. A being who was left with only a blind obsession with his family and its prosperity. So it was obvious that Jin was much weaker than his father. And for this reason, the man simply did not notice his son. Jin always remained in the shadow of his brothers and sisters. But he understood that in this life everything would be completely different and absolutely no one would dare to ignore him. Jin walked in with full confidence and bowed to his father, thereby greeting the leader. Shiran didn't understand why his youngest son called him his leader and not his father. Jin answered him that more than 100 members of their family had gathered here, so he decided that it would be more correct to be the head here, and that is why he addressed the man in this way. This was a satisfactory answer, which pleased the chief, but he immediately moved on to why he was there in the first place, so he asked the boy to call him father. And now he decided to ask Jin the same question that he asked his brothers, in which he wanted to know who was to blame for the quarrel that broke out between them. Without thinking twice, Jin put his hand on his heart and declared that it was actually revenge, after which he added that if he was from the Runkandel family, then when someone did something to him, it was his duty to repay the debt, and it didn't matter whether it was help or insult. After such an answer, the head of the family suddenly ordered everyone to leave the hall and asked only young Master Jin to stay. After a few minutes, absolutely everyone left the hall, and so the leader started talking about the fact that he needed to ask the guy something. So he told everyone to leave the hall, and at that moment he finally started talking about the fact that the Heighton and Daytona brothers told him that Jin had some kind of special power. He also did not forget to add that Runkandel strictly forbids any use of magic, and therefore if the guy owns it, he will not be able to exceed the limits. And now, taking into account everything that was said, the head of the family wanted to ask the guy what kind of power this was, but before the guy gave him the answer, he decided to once again point out the fact that if this was magic, then he convinced the guy that he wouldn't get off that easy. Jin understood perfectly well that since his father knew about this power, he most likely would not miss the opportunity to learn more. Because it was known that Soldred's power was not magic or an aura, the guy himself didn't know exactly what it was. Therefore, Jin decided without thinking twice to demonstrate to his father what power he possessed and what was the man's surprise when he saw the power of the first head of the family. Shiran couldn't believe that this guy really had the soul of a Barasada in him, and that he was truly destined to become the head of the house. Considering all this, The father came to the conclusion that this was the power of the shadow god Soldred, and he was absolutely right. Jin pretended that he didn't understand what his father was talking about. This caused the man to tell him that Soldred had made a pact with the first head of the Run Candle House, Lord Tamar, and that this god had since become the patron of the family. But after Lord Tamar's death, Soldred no longer appeared before the members of Run Candle. Shirin didn't fully understand why, but apparently Soldred had returned to watch them through Jin. Then the guy had a question in which he wanted to know whether God Soldred was stronger for him. Shirin couldn't answer him that question because he had never fought with the gods, so he didn't know. This clearly made Jin smile. The mere thought that he could become stronger than his father made the boy incredibly happy. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted when the man placed his hand on his head and said that Jin had asked him a very good question. The guy understood that in this way, he was giving him a reason to think, and Shiran himself believed that coming here personally was the right decision, and finally he decided to ask his son how he plans to use the soul of the Barisada. Without thinking twice, Jin immediately said that his plans were quite simple. He was going to use her for the good of his family. The man's reaction was quite unexpected. He suddenly started laughing loudly and telling Jin that it was quite a funny lie. He thought so because just recently the guy beat up his older brothers, then left them lying on the street during a storm. And after all this, he tells him that he wants to use this power for the good of the family. Jin knew that it wouldn't be that easy to fool his father, so he had to think of something to say. And he decided to tell the truth this time, so he said that he planned to use her to his advantage. Although the face of the head of the family changed, he still answered the guy that such an answer more than suited him, after which he was about to leave. But before that, he told his son that from that moment on, he would be under his supervision. And as soon as the man left, Jin could finally breathe a sigh of relief. He had managed to survive this. It was enough to use this power as he pleased. But now his father would be watching him. Jin could not even imagine that everything would go so well. And now it seemed to him that his new life would be radically different from the past. Sister Mary gave the boy a small gift before they left. According to her, it was a special gift that she had prepared especially for him, so the maid would take it because it was quite heavy. The only hint she left him was that Mary told him to cook it and eat it, after which she added that he needs to become strong quickly. Jin didn't fully understand why she gave this gift to him, but as soon as he opened the box, he realized what was going on. Inside this box was a phoenix heart, an extremely rare item. Jin couldn't quite understand why Mary would give something like that to a 7-year-old child, but he couldn't say he was particularly upset. Mary Runcandle, 7th Captain and 6th Rank Knight, is known as Storm Mary, and she also has a lesser-known nickname. But not many people knew this nickname, only those who managed to survive and called her the crazy woman of the southern lands. Thinking about it, the guy came to the conclusion that his crazy sister had given him such a valuable thing, and that the words in which she asked him to grow up faster, she had put a certain meaning into them. Jin decided that if he ate the heart of a phoenix at such an early age, he would most likely increase his resistance to fire and of course speed up his growth. And if you think about it, the heart of a phoenix is required by experienced mages to safely summon phoenixes. Jin did not deny the fact that perhaps in this life he would be able to summon his phoenix, which would obediently carry out his orders. Jilly distracted his thoughts when she brought him the prepared heart, for which Jin was very grateful. The maid thought that Lady Mary had given him a wonderful gift before leaving, so she asked him to eat it while the soup was still warm. But the guy was not given peace by his brothers, who were watching him, and at one point Jin could not stand it, and asked them to immediately talk about what they wanted from him. Dayton answered him that in fact nothing like that. It just seemed to them that there was too much food for him alone. They noticed that Jilly was running around with such a huge pot, and they thought that maybe there was enough food for them too. Jin realized that they apparently wanted to eat this soup so much that they were ready to do anything to get it. Then the guy decided to let them do it, but first he wanted to ask them to fulfill one of his requests. After some time, the brothers did not understand at all why they were doing this because there was nothing there. Besides, they were worried that something might happen to them when someone found out that they were digging here. But on the other hand, they understood that this shouldn't bother them, because if someone gets into trouble, it will be the little ones, and they will still get this soup. When both brothers returned back to the castle, Jilly was slightly surprised at what happened to them. They were in a terrible state, and Jin even managed to make fun of them, saying that he had been waiting for them for so long, but they did not want to listen to this and wanted to immediately get their portion of soup. Jin didn't understand who he was not to leave them some soup, so he got up from the table and said that they could start eating since they wanted it so much. But the plate was absolutely empty, and the brothers did not understand where he left it for them. But then they realized that he left them 2 teaspoons, and it seemed to them that this was too little for them. But Jin did not understand why they were complaining, because he said that he would leave them. He just did not specify how much it would be. The guy thought that he had fulfilled his promise and therefore was about to leave, and of course before leaving he did not forget to wish them bon appétit. He went down into the tunnel that he had asked his brothers to dig, and was extremely surprised that they took his request quite seriously and did everything as he asked. Jin first knocked on the walls and determined that for such thickness, a first-tier spell would be more than enough for him. He couldn't wait for this moment anymore because he was extremely bored saving up all this mana and not using it. But finally, he could do it. The guy used one of his most powerful spells, which allowed him to get into a secret place, and it was about none other than the secret library of Runkandel. In his past life, he never managed to get here, so he felt a little strange. It seemed to him that his older brothers were saying that a special phrase was needed to open it. And Jin knew what phrase to say, so he said in a quiet voice, "The child of Runkandel came to console Murakan." After these words, the doors in front of him immediately opened, and finally Jin could enter this library. The Runkandel Secret Library is a place that holds many secrets from the clans that the Runkandel have exterminated over the last 1,000 years. Only Runkandel commanders were allowed to enter, and it was truly enormous in scale. In his past life, his brother immediately said that it was useless for him to know about this place, because Jin was never able to become a commander. But he still managed to learn something useful, and, as was evident, he made good use of this knowledge. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted after his short walk through this library, when he saw a man who was locked in a transparent prison. Looking closer, Jin noticed that the man had scales visible on his face. That's why it seemed to him that he was simply not a person, but some kind of animal that his family had caught and put in this prison. Suddenly he remembered the words he needed to say before entering this library. That's why he suggested that perhaps this is the Black Dragon Murakan. Jin heard that he lost to the first head of the house and fell into a deep sleep, but Jin never thought that it was really true. In any case, he didn't have time for this now. He needed to find the clan's secret materials as soon as possible. After a few minutes, Jin still managed to find the secret tomes of other clans. To begin with, he decided to read a tome from the once famous Kungan Swordsman clan. But the content of this book was clearly difficult for him to understand, with his knowledge of third-rank theory. He decided that it would be a good idea to take this book with him, but he was aware of the fact that he could be caught. So he decided that it would be best if he came here from time to time and rewrote the book little by little. And Jin did this for quite a long time, until someone distracted him with their noise. It seemed to him that at this time no one would go to the library of the formidable castle now. But apparently he was wrong, because as soon as he opened the door to see what was happening in the corridor, he saw a man in front of him who immediately wanted to ask the guy what was going on here. Jin immediately realized that Murakan was standing in front of him, but he didn't understand how this was even possible. In his past life, nothing was said about him being able to wake up, so the guy didn't pay attention to it. But apparently, it was a mistake. He tried to mentally force himself to calm down, because it was worth remembering that Murakan was the guardian dragon of their family. So if he was polite and pretended to be an ordinary child, then perhaps he wouldn't do anything to him. So the first thing he decided to do was to greet the guardian of their family once again as the child of Runkandel. But for some reason this made him very angry, and he literally went berserk in 1 second. Murakam started yelling at the guy because he thought that Jin called him a pathetic guardian. He still didn't understand why people who don't know anything, treat him like some kind of guardian. According to him, he hated the Runkandels, and he did not understand at all how they dared to say such things to him. It was obvious that Murakam wanted to take out all his anger on this poor guy. But he was still able to come to terms with it and calm down, after which he added that he woke up because he smelled a good smell for the first time in a long time. But only this scoundrel was there. Murakan didn't understand why this guy smelled of spiritual energy and tried to sniff the guy from all sides, and it looked strange, to put it mildly. He went on to say that although he had slept for 1,000 years, he still remembered that smell very well, that thick aroma of spiritual energy. Such a smell can only be found in those who have made a contract, like Tamar did in his time. Jin did not expect that the reason why Murakan suddenly woke up was his spiritual energy. Murakami couldn't believe that this smell was coming from the little guy, so he carefully began to look around, trying to find where this smell was coming from. Jin was watching carefully at this time and thinking that perhaps it wouldn't hurt for him to check something. So he turned to Sir Murakami, and he was sure that the guy clearly knew something, so he turned to him. Jin created a small ball in which a lot of energy was concentrated and added that his father said that this was the power of the shadow god, Lord Soldred. Murakami immediately began to shake with fear and asked the guy to tell him that it was just a joke. But looking at the expression on Jin's face, he understood that it was clearly not a joke. After which he fell to his knees and began to say something about the treaty promised 1,000 years ago. Jin didn't understand what this guard was talking about, but he still continued to listen to him attentively. Suddenly, Murakami looked up and told Jin about the promise he had once made to Soldred, in which he will be obliged to help a person his whole life, and apparently this person turned out to be Jin. Murakami then said that he would tell him all the details a little later, because he had just woken up, so he was still a little confused. And besides, it would be difficult for a child his age to understand everything. But still, he did not forget to formally introduce himself to the man whom Soldred had chosen. His name was Murakami. He was Soldred's confidant, his friend, and the last descendant of the original Shadows, and following his 1,000-year promise, from today on, he would be on his side. Apparently, Jin really would need a little more time to digest this information, because it was difficult to believe that such a giant would help him. At this stage, Murakami only wanted to know the name of the person Soldred had chosen. Jin happily introduced himself to his new friend as the 13th and youngest child of the Runcandle family. The name of the Black Dragon Murakami comes from the famous mountain on which the Thunder Castle is located. It was a powerful creature that ruled these lands for a long time. However, 1,000 years ago, the dragon fell at the hands of the first head of the Runcandle family, Temar. After which the legend says that having abandoned his lands, Murakami fell into a deep sleep. Now Jin understood that he was not their enemy. On the contrary, Murakami was the guardian and good friend of the first head of the family. A man who has made a pact with God is accompanied by a guardian dragon, but nothing was known about Soldred's guardian dragon until now. Now the guy understood why no one knew about Murakami. The next morning, Jin came back to Murakami with the thought that he would have a personal guardian dragon. And so he decided to get to know his keeper as best he could. So he decided to start with a small gift for him. He brought him some food that Jilly had prepared. After his awakening, Murakami did not leave the library for several weeks, and the first question Jin decided to ask him was why he fought with Temar. In response to this, the dragon told him that it was 1,000 years ago, and as it turned out, he did not remember the reason for their fight. The only thing Jin could learn from Murakami that day was that he was madly in love with strawberry pies. At one point in their dialogue, Murakami decided to ask the guy what he was always doing there when he came, to which Jin told him that he was copying books to take them with him, because if he took the originals, then they could find out about his visits to the library. Murakami was surprised that the guy even understood what they were talking about, but Jin assured him that this was not entirely true. According to him, he understood about 30% of the entire material. But the dragon decided to cheer him up, and said that for his age he was doing great. Other children wouldn't even try, that he was doing well. Regarding the other children, he of course agreed with Murakami, but in his family this was only the average level. According to the guy, there are 12 more children in the family, in addition to the father, mother, and elders. And if he wants to surpass them all, then he must work much harder. So he suddenly became interested in asking Murakami how much he thought the first head of the Temar family would understand if he read this book. Jin wanted to compare himself to the strongest known being in history. He wanted to know what level he was in comparison to him. Murakami thought for a bit and said that in fact, at the same age, Temar could not understand absolutely a single word from this book. But the Black Dragon hastened to assure him that the theory was in fact very different from the real battle, and Temar had once fought well even without reading it. Although it still seemed to Murakami that Temar had talent, and Jin definitely had it, though not as outstanding. These words made Jin think that he might never become as strong as the first chapter. In response to this, Murakami told him that he had made a deal with Soldred, and that he had enough brains to read such books. So all the Black Dragon could advise him was that he just needed to train hard and be patient. Then, if he followed his advice, he could become as strong as Temar. Murakami did not deny that perhaps little Jin would even surpass his distant relative, which Jin himself had little faith in. But the Black Dragon asked him not to lose hope, because he at least had the strength of Soldred, whose nickname had always been Limitless. And this can only mean one thing. Since Soldred has unlimited power, then he, as the Chosen One, has the same potential. So Murakhan forbade him from getting upset ahead of time, and also promised him that he would teach him a new skill so that he could feel better. This skill was called Spirit Release, and Murakhan believed that the guy had to be able to use this skill. According to him, everyone who uses the energy of the soul must master this skill. It is the basis of everything related to its use. But he immediately warned him that it was extremely dangerous, and if used without proper training, there could be problems. So he immediately asked Jin not to rush and carefully study this skill. Jin understood him, and quickly wanted to know what he needed to do. According to Murakhan, he first needed to master the mana emission. Jin didn't quite understand why he needed to do this, because he had done this hundreds of times in his past life. Murakhan explained that spirit release involved mana emission and mana transfer, so he needed to master these skills to a proper level. But the worst part was that the Black Dragon felt like it would take about 2 or even 3 years to learn. Listening to all this, Jin immediately realized that it was too long for him. Murakhan continued to talk about how he couldn't teach him anything worthwhile until he mastered the basics. And while he was saying all this, Jin decided to try releasing his mana right now. And he managed to do it the first time, which shocked Murakhan. The Black Dragon spent some time trying to figure out how the guy did it at all, but according to Jin, he knew how to do it before. Murakhan asked him not to say that the boy also had the ability to transfer mana, but before he could say this, Jin demonstrated this skill. The Black Dragon could only say that only geniuses were capable of such things, and apparently the boy really had enormous talent. That's why he finally agreed to show what the release of the soul looks like. And finally, Jin can breathe a sigh of relief. And Murakhan began by saying that the talent of the shadow spirit is ultimately drawn from the shadows. Every shadow in this world is born by the will of Soldred, so he owns all the shadows. And Jin, as they have already found out, is the only chosen one of Soldred, so the guy can become the master of all shadows. After Murakhan showed him what the release of the spirit is, and immediately wanted to ask him how he felt, Luna destroyed the huge monster, and her assistant immediately ran up to her and informed her that the area was cleared and there were 5 more areas left to clear and the mission would be completed. She was glad to hear this and immediately said that 4 months should be enough for this, so she asked to tell all the knights to rest. But while he was still there, she suddenly decided to ask him what, in his opinion, 9-year-old children like. 6 months after meeting Murakhan, the Tona twins turned 10 years old and left Thunder Castle. And a few days later, Jin turned 9 years old. Jilly and other subjects in this castle congratulated him on this, and the guy in turn asked to share the cake among everyone. That day, Khan also came to visit him, and the first thing he did was ask for forgiveness for the unexpected visit. Jin thought that something had happened, so he started to get a little nervous. But as it turned out, the thing was that the guy's sister Luna had come to visit. The guy clearly didn't expect such a meeting because they had never been close to her. Why would she suddenly decide to visit him? The first commander of the Runkandel family and a knight of the 9th rank, the eldest of the 13 Runkandel children, the White Whale, Luna, the strongest of the current siblings, who at one time clearly stated her position that she did not want to be the head of the family, also does not participate in the disgusting war for the inheritance of Runkandel, which is why she is called the White Whale, which seems to swim alone. For this reason, she never took an interest in her younger brothers and sisters, to such an extent that she seemed to him like a stranger in her past life, and not a member of the family. They were so different from each other. That's why Jin was so surprised that she suddenly decided to come to him at Thunder Castle. Apparently something happened since she was here, and the first thought that came to him was that the girl found out that Jin was visiting the library. Luna came closer to her little brother, and the first thing she said was that he had grown quite a lot. Jin told her that if she had told him in advance, he would have worn something more appropriate to meet her. She put her hand on his head and said that it sounded pretty cute, but she still thought it was weird that she had to warn someone just to see her little brother. She also noticed that he looked quite bad, and it seemed to her that he was sick, but that was far from the case. He decided to tell her straight out that he was a little nervous because it was his first time talking to her, so he couldn't help it. At that moment, Luna was thinking that crushing and taking everything from each other was the custom of Runkandel. But still it was strange for her to see how Jin thought that she had come to intimidate him. In any case, she said in a quiet voice that apparently he simply didn't understand her. She then added that he might still be young, but even in that case, he was still a member of the Runkandle family. Then she actually knelt down and asked her younger brother for one request. She would very much like for them to be left alone because she would like to talk to him. Jin couldn't even imagine why she needed to talk to him personally, but he decided that such an opportunity could not be missed, so he agreed without any problems, although he did not know the reason, but it seemed to him that she did not want to do anything bad to him. As soon as they were alone with him, she told him that the reason she had come to him so unexpectedly was that she needed to tell him something. After which she started talking about how when his father came to him personally, he became the center of attention for the whole house. This means that when he leaves the Thunder Castle, then all his brothers and sisters will try to control him. But she immediately said that she didn't want him to get caught up in this family's squabbles and feel unhappy. She also clearly wouldn't want the Runkandle family's dirty customs to harm him. Now Jin began to understand why the girl had abandoned the idea of becoming the head of the family. But he couldn't understand, if she didn't want him to suffer from the showdown within the family, then why didn't she warn him about it in his past life? Was it really just because he wasn't worthy of her attention? Or is it because his siblings didn't see him as a rival before? He had different thoughts in his head, but he still decided to thank his sister for warning him. But still, he already has a reason why he doesn't intend to participate in this. Luna immediately began to tell him that this was all serious. She was telling him this not because she considered him a threat to herself in the future, but before she could finish speaking, Jin interrupted her and said that he already knew this very well. According to him, he understands all this so well because there had already been an attempt on his life, which surprised the girl. This literally left her in shock. She couldn't believe that someone in the Thunder Castle had already tried to destroy the guy. She immediately began asking him to tell her who it was, but Jin was not going to do this, and to be honest, he himself did not know. He also added that they tried, but it didn't work, and he was still fine, so it seemed to him that there was clearly no need to worry. In response to this, she said that she was very glad that the guy helped her understand that not all her brothers and sisters hate her. After which she decided to hug him, which Jin clearly did not expect, but she is still very saddened by the news that he got caught up in their family's squabbles. At that moment, Jin was thinking that he couldn't even imagine that Sister Luna would be such a sensitive person, so he tried to calm her down a little and tell her not to be so sad. Luna agreed with him and added that one shouldn't only talk about the bad on such a wonderful day. After all, she didn't forget that today was his birthday. And in honor of this, she came here today to give him a gift. She took a small box out of her pocket, inside which was a pendant, after which she asked Jin to turn around so that she could put the pendant around his neck. And while she was doing this, she told him that only once, when he was in a hopeless situation, he could break the blue stone in this pendant, and then no matter where he was, the moon would immediately come to his aid. So she asked him not to forget about it and to always carry it with him. In this way, she congratulated her brother on his 9th birthday. Jin was clearly pleased to have such a gift and such a sister. After a short get-together, Luna decided that it was time for her to leave, and after she congratulated the guy once again, she said goodbye and headed towards the exit. Jin was very happy to talk to her, and in response could only wish her a good journey. That same evening, Jin went down to the library again to continue his studies, and the first thing Murakami decided to ask the guy was what was hanging around his neck. Jin was surprised that the black dragon even noticed this, but still told him that it was a birthday present. Murakami immediately began to say that he does not know who gave it to him, but apparently this person cares about it very much, because it is a very special pendant. And according to Murakami, it belonged to the Beast King Orgel 1,000 years ago. Countless people died trying to get this pendant. Besides all this pendant gives him resistance to any magical attack below the 5th rank, enhances the wearer's magical skills, and Murakami assumed that it also has a summoning function. Jin was surprised that Murakami knew so much, but the black dragon asked him not to be surprised, because at that time it was the peak of his activity. In any case, he assumed that this gift was given to him by the person with a strong aura who came here. Jin confirmed that it was his older sister, and the guy was very surprised that he was able to feel her energy. Murakami confirmed this information and, moreover, added that his sister should have also felt it. Jin immediately began to worry because he thought that she might tell everyone else, but Murakami assured her that the guy had nothing to worry about. After all, He considered that she was an older sister who gave him such a valuable gift as if it was a trifle, so it seemed to him that after that she would hardly go and inform on her younger brother. Luna really did feel a strong energy when she came out of the storm castle, which clearly had not been there before. She decided that she should pretend that she didn't know anything yet. But in her mind, she told her brother that it didn't matter what he did or who he became because she was going to support him always. He thought that the time spent in Storm Castle would be extremely useless, but on the contrary, he received many things, such as the recognition and expectations of his father, the phoenix heart he received from his older sister Mary, the support of his older sister Luna, and most importantly, he met his guardian dragon Murakan. He could not even dream of all this in his past life. Soon he turned 10, and he finally began preparing for the trip home. He began to spend a lot of time with his knight companion Khan, who taught him the basics of combat. During training, Khan often thought that Jin was the type of person the boss might be interested in, and that he usually assessed such people. But with each training session, he became more and more convinced that it was Jin who was assessing him. And after another such training, as soon as Khan finished it, he told Jin that they had something to talk about with him. The guy didn't even guess what could have happened, but his first thought was that something was wrong with their training. But to his surprise, Khan suddenly bowed down to Jin and told the boy that it was an honor for him to train the boy. He then added that he would soon be leaving the Thunder Castle, and then Khan promised that he would make every effort to teach him as much as possible by the end of this period. Jin was pleased to hear such words, so he answered Kanu that he would count on his knight. After another training session, Jin decided to play with fire a little and tried to stick his finger in there, and as soon as he did this, he realized that he did not feel any pain at all, and finally the effect of the phoenix heart began to work. The guy's maid, as soon as she saw this, tried to stop the guy because it seemed to her that it should be very hot and painful. But Jin assured her that everything was indeed fine. It now felt like he was dipping his finger into warm water. She was glad to hear that Lady Mary's gift had already had a positive effect. She had only heard about the effect of the phoenix heart, and was seeing it for the first time in reality. Jin was not much different from her, and was also experiencing how it worked for the first time. But even in this case, he considered that this was not the maximum, and it seemed to him that he had only learned half of it so far. And he was thinking that most likely in a few years he would fully receive all the effects from the heart. His thoughts were interrupted by the maid, who once again reminded him that they were leaving the castle tomorrow morning, and therefore she asked him to warn her in advance if he needed anything. In response to this, he suddenly said that he urgently needed to go out for a short while, and this was really quite unexpected. He decided to visit Murakan and remind him that they were leaving the castle tomorrow, but the Black Dragon did not forget about it even without him, because he had actually been waiting for this day for an eternity. But Jin was still worried, because he couldn't even imagine how the Black Dragon would follow him. Murakan immediately told the guy that there was no point in worrying about it, because he was at least a legendary shadow dragon. And at the moment it doesn't matter at all how much he has weakened. For him it's still as easy as pie. According to him, he will take care to follow the guy carefully, so that he can't be noticed. Jin didn't understand why he was telling the guy such important information only now, but Murakan told him once again that there was no point in worrying about it, because he had been sleeping for the last 1,000 years, and it was normal that he was not in perfect shape yet. The guy suddenly began to wonder whether his guardian would be able to regain his former strength, and according to Murakan, he would do it, moreover. With the guy, he would become even stronger. After all, the whole point is that he is his guardian dragon after all, so Jin also needs to hurry up and become a powerful mage swordsman like Timar. Hearing this, the guy decided to ask again if his family was originally mages and swordsmen at the same time. The guy knew about this because in his past life, Soldred told him about it. Initially, the Runkandle family only had magical swordsmen, and the first head of the house was the strongest of them. But almost no one knows this, and this upset Jin a little. Murakan added that the reason why the current Runkandle rejected magic and began to study only swordsmanship is because of the humiliating pact made 1,000 years ago. According to the Shadow Dragon, people still called him the guardian of the family, but he was sure that they would be very embarrassed if he appeared in front of them. And if this had happened 1,000 years ago, he was sure that everyone would have run wherever their eyes looked and would have been horrified by the fact that he was next to the most respected creature in the world. Jin was very doubtful that his family would do such a thing, but he still continued to listen to Murakan. The Shadow Dragon was not surprised that the guy doubted it. In any case, there was no point in proving it now, and he only asked the guy not to worry about him, because he would hide very well. Jin believed him, but he didn't know what to do with the capsule that contained Murakan, because his family members could come in at any moment and notice that the Shadow Dragon was not there. Murakan thought that this issue was too easy to solve with the help of dragon magic, with which he would create a copy of himself. For him, creating a copy of himself is such a trifle that he can do it with his eyes closed, so he assured Jin that there was no need to worry. But still, he did not forget to note the fact that he had not yet regained all his strength, so maintaining it for a long time would be quite difficult. But he was ready to continue in the same spirit until Jean grew up. The guy was pleased to hear this, so he immediately thanked his guardian for his care, and Murakan asked him to respect him more after that. And just in response to that, Gina told him that he brought him something special today. The guy was talking about a pie that was made from the first batch of strawberries this year, and wine that he stole when Gilly wasn't looking, a kind of gift to Murakan. But Jin had one condition. He asked Murakan not to make a bad copy while drunk. The Shadow Dragon's joy knew no bounds, and he immediately declared that he would do everything perfectly for such a gift. After some time, Gilly was already helping Jean get dressed, and while she was doing this, she told him that when he returned home, he clearly should not expect quiet days, even if he had trained hard. After all, she thought that there would be more work there, and it would clearly be much more difficult for him, and she would no longer be able to cook pies whenever he wanted. Jean assured her that there was no reason to worry about this because he intended to work very hard when he returned home so that he would not have any problems. Gilly was very happy to hear this. Suddenly their dialogue was interrupted by two knights named Jerome and Holtz. Today their task was to help Jin get home safe and sound. They would accompany him until he reached the safe zone, and Jin himself was not against such good protection, so he did not say a word. After this dialogue, Jin and his comrades finally left the storm castle, and the next stop of the young master was the main monastery of Runkadel, which was called the Garden of Swords. At one point on their journey, Gilly noticed that the snow had become very heavy, and she immediately suggested that Jean wait out the blizzard in the nearest village. She felt like they wouldn't be able to get through the teleportation gate in this weather, and Jin eventually agreed with her. Suddenly, their carriage began to shake, as if it had been caught in the middle of an earthquake. Two knights immediately began shouting to them that there was an ambush and that it would be best for them to stay inside the carriage, which is what they did. At that moment, Gilly tried to calm the young master down as much as possible, saying that Jerome and Holtz were 7th-rank knights and that she was also next to him. But looking at her, it was clear that only she needed support. She saw that they were attacked by 20 magicians and the same number of warriors. Perhaps there were archers, but she didn't know for sure. Jin, hearing this, realized that he and Gilly needed to get out of the carriage immediately, after which he began to talk about how the Runkandel guards would never just abandon a child from a family without protection, and at least one of the two should be with him. Based on this, Jin decided that these two knights were either fake escorts or simply traitors. In any case, the guy thought that it was not so important now because some device could be installed in the carriage, and therefore they needed to escape urgently. Although the girl was incredibly scared, she still agreed with the young master's idea. And from that moment on, she decided to show her true face, and she, as a servant of the Runkandel family, would protect the young master as long as necessary. So she immediately warned him that she might be a little rude to him. As they ran away, Gilly told him that she should receive due punishment for this incident upon arrival at the family estate, but Jean felt that now was not the best time to worry about it. After which he asked her to go to those two knights, because he needed to check something. Gilly didn't quite understand why they were doing this, so the guy explained to her that those attacking guys could possibly be their allies, and if he had been their target, then as soon as they ran out of the carriage, they would have immediately tried to destroy them. But it was suspiciously quiet around. As soon as they came closer, just as Jin had expected, they saw a coat of arms with a leaf and a pattern with a black beast. This is the Yuta family, a clan of magicians from Middle, and next to them were the mercenaries of the Black King. Suddenly their conversation was interrupted by one of the magicians, who shouted that he saw Gilly McCrolin, and also confirmed that Jean Runkandel was alive. And as soon as he said this, The head of the magicians immediately gave an order to all the squads that their main goal was to protect Jin Runcandle. A few seconds later, a man appeared in front of them, who introduced himself as Murkayo, and he is the vice captain of the 3rd squad of the Black King's mercenaries, and at the request of the Runcandle family, they will protect them. Looking at these two knights, Jin understood that most likely this was not a betrayal. Rather, they were initially fake escorts, and if they were actually 7th rank knights, then dealing with these troops would not be difficult for them. Jilly couldn't help but start screaming at them because she immediately wanted to find out who they were and what their purpose was. For one of them, it was funny that they actually thought that they would tell everything to the Runcandles. The girl tried to talk to them, but suddenly Jin asked her to destroy one of them. He then asked Jilly to try and cut off the other man's arms and drag his body to him. The girl, hearing this, immediately went into battle and was ready to carry out the order of her young master. She was able to complete the first task in a matter of seconds, and one of them died immediately. The second one also did not wait long for his turn and lost his hand in the same way. And then, without thinking twice, Jilly took his other hand away. Then, as Jin had asked her, she took him by the head and dragged him to Jin, while telling this knight that it seemed his masters had greatly underestimated them. After she brought the body of this knight to her master Jin, she finally told him that in order to become a servant of the Runcandle family, one must be at least a 7th rank martial artist. Jin completely agreed with her, and added that in order to destroy a child from the Runcandle family, they should have sent at least 3 or even 4 8th rank knights. The knight, who could still speak, began to shout and ask not to make him laugh, because in his opinion this was just a warning, after which he added that the era of Runcandle's rule would soon end. Jin did not understand why he was shouting like that, but he still agreed with this knight and, moreover, added that he also strived for this. Instead of the era of the Runcandle family's rule, he would like to see the era of Jin Runcandle's power come. At these words, the knight shouted again, but this time only 3 words. He shouted, "Glory to the great Zippels." The Zippels are a clan of mages that rule the rest of the world. They are essentially the opposite of the Runcandle family, and while some strive to reach the peak of swordsmanship, others do the same with magic. 1,000 years ago, when the first head of the Runcandle house died, the Zippels forced the Runcandle family to enter into a humiliating pact that forbade its members from using magic, which is the reason for the suppression of magical abilities in the Runcandle family. Considering all this, it was not difficult to guess that for the Runcandles, the Zippels were literally enemies of 1,000 years ago, and Jin was quite interested to know who would dare to take such a step. But now, thanks to this stupid knight, he knows everything. After which he asked Jilly to throw him away somewhere nearby, because he believed that there was simply no point in interrogating him further. Of course, even for the Zippels, Runcandle are sworn enemies, although they constantly terrorize Runcandle. But today's incident is different from their usual antics. It clearly looks more like an attack by independent extremists. He carefully examined the crime scene and was sure that something was clearly wrong, but it was really difficult for him to find what exactly. Jin knew that no matter how skillful his disguise was, it would still be extremely difficult to fool a 7th rank martial artist. So, considering all these facts, Jin began to think that it might be the interference of that same guy. Jilly approached her young master and said that she had done everything as he had asked, in response to which Jin praised her and said that she had done her job well. After which he approached Murkayo, who held the position of vice captain of the Black King's mercenaries, if Jin remembered correctly. In any case, the guy approached him to tell him that thanks to the fact that they distracted them, he and Jilly managed to escape, and therefore, as soon as they get to their estate, Jin will immediately report on their exploits, and the family will repay them in full. In the meantime, he asked the man and his men to take care of him until they reached the gate. Murkayo, after such words, was ready to do anything for Jin, so he assured the young master that they would try to do everything possible. Although he thought mentally that despite the fact that he was a descendant of Runcandle, who left the castle for the first time, and that he was only 10 years old, all these facts were surprising, because he was already confident in himself and behaved with dignity. So he began to wonder if perhaps the things he had said earlier about the Jin Runcandle era had been more than just childish chatter. After these reflections, he approached his people and said that until they reached the gates, he asked them to control themselves and think about their actions. The mercenaries did not understand what kind of strange order this was, And such a sudden one at that, because they had absolutely not cared all this time. But he once again asked them to shut their mouths and do what he ordered them to do. Jilly interrupted their not-so-nice conversation and told Murkayo that they could move out. Murkayo listened to them without any problems, and at the same time put his heart to his heart, which greatly surprised his subordinates. On the way, Jilly was a little worried that they had just abandoned those imposters there, but Murkayo assured her that everything was actually okay, because it didn't matter whether they were found alive or not, they would still serve as a good example for their comrades. Jilly was glad to hear this, and she was also pleased by the fact that in about 2 hours there should be a village. Jean suggested waiting out the storm there. And since they were already talking, the guy decided to ask Jilly not to be upset about the incident with the escort, because she should understand that it was not her fault in the first place, because even the Knight Khan, who has the 9th rank, did not notice it.